oturumumuzda
Hello
birlikteyiz.
everyone, we are together in our second session. Now, as I said, actually we were supposed to have two speakers, but we lost connection with one of the speakers. We don't know the reason. So we will have only one speaker. I will be introducing him, Mehmet Cem Kamözüt, from Mimar Sinan University of Fine Arts, teaching science history, and he has completed his PhD in Middle East Technical University, Department of Philosophy, especially interested in 17th century revolution of science and history of science. And he will be telling us whether or not Anthropocene should be named as a part of geological eras. Should we start it from 1950s with architecture revolution? Should we call it Anthropocene or Capitolocene? All these questions are discussed a lot. And Cem today will be telling us to what extent this is an apt naming. Yes, floor is yours.
Oturumumuza biraz geç başladığımız için soru cevap kısmını biraz kısa.
We will having a shorter question and answer session because we have started a bit late. We will not be able to take a lot of questions. Let me tell it from the very beginning. Yes, Professor Cem, floor is yours. Thank you very much for this introduction and for inviting me to this session. I am studying science, philosophy of science. And we will be discussing Anthropocene in relation to what Professor Karun already listed us as a group of questions. Actually, making Anthropocene as a part of science of philosophy of science, this can give some connotations. So, my title is, should Anthropocene be the name of a geological epoch? Despite all its popularity in the field of social sciences, the term Anthropocene is not yet accepted as a real geological period by the International Geological Sciences Union. Maybe it will be in the future, maybe it will never happen. However, there's a very intense debate in this direction. On the one hand, there are those who want the Anthropocene to be recognized as a geological period, requesting that science should not remain silent about what's happening and make an objective assessment of the situation. And on the other hand, there are those who argue that science should maintain its objectivity and stay out of this debate for the same reason. Undoubtedly, there are those who oppose this myth of objectivity in science. We can be opposing to this too. There are people who even say that the naming, the denomination is misleading and suggest that all the humans are not the perpetrator of this process, or this is a political process. So they suggest names such as Menocene or Capitolocene or Novacene, which is completely new era. Actually, in my proceeding, I defend a very simple view. Anthropocene, Capitolocene, or similar terms are exceptionally functional terms. I don't want to discuss about their values. I don't mean not to use them. But on the other hand, accepting any of these as a geological term describing a geological period, they will lose their functions. Those who want to see Anthropocene as a term of natural science are already making an effort to eliminate the function of the term in social sciences. First, let's look at an argument that the Anthropocene should be defined as a geological period. An editorial article published in Nature in 2011 says, official recognition of the concept Anthropocene will encourage interdisciplinary studies, and it will encourage a mindset that will not only fully understand the transformation that's happening now, but will also take an action to control it. That prevents us from taking action. Why we seem to deny that we are in a serious and dangerous situation for the future of humanity is that the concept of the Anthropocene has not been officially recognized by International Union of Geological Sciences. That's my suspicion. It's not possible to deny that there are already many interdisciplinary studies. Therefore, if we want Anthropocene to be a geological term, we need much more convincing reasons. Now, I will look at the history of the term to try to understand what kind of needs it comes from. Although the history of the term is somewhat controversial, it was Paul Crutzen who made the Anthropocene famous. As an important scientist, Crutzen previously worked on the ozone layer hole and shared the 1995 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. We owe a lot to Crutzen and those who carried out studies like him in closing the hole in the ozone layer. However, if you remember what we experienced about the ozone layer problem, we see an interesting situation. It was said that this will be the end of the world, and this depletion would end this world. Actually, this disaster did not happen, but on the other hand, we did not need to make any social arrangements in this regard. Still, we have refrigerators. This was not because there was no hole in the ozone layer or depletion in the ozone layer, or because the claim that refrigerators caused this. The danger was real, but science saved us. We have refrigerators and deodorants that do not produce these gases. We got rid of the problem thanks to science without unplugging our refrigerator, even for during a day, without having any impact on our social organization or production relations. One of our saviors was Crutzen, who made Anthropocene famous. Crutzen, who solved the previous disaster with science without making any change in our lifestyle, hoped to solve the current disaster without making any change in our behaviors, such as taking planes, driving cars, consuming meat. Maybe this is actually possible. On the other hand, even if such a solution were possible, there is no sign that it can be achieved in time. It's also dangerous to generalize from a single example, such as the depletion in the ozone layer. Crutzen's effort to accept or make accepted the Anthropocene as a geological period is based on this technical solution idea. Just as we were able to overcome the previous danger thanks to technological progress, we are trying to overcome this new danger in a similar way. Of course, Crutzen is not alone in this effort. I don't think Crutzen and those who think like him are deliberately trying to prevent a political debate. But I'm saying that they are trying to translate a problem into a technical problem and develop technological solutions. Even if the Anthropocene is accepted as a geological period, it will be after a very long evaluation process. The International Union of Geological Sciences should vote on this, should approve this, and until the voting, they should make recommendations to the relevant boards and to determine the advantages and disadvantages of this decision. There is a subgroup created for this purpose. Anthropocene Study Group made its first official statement in December 1st, 2009, and Crutzen is a part of this group. Their work is still underway. The statement in their first text also explains the need for the term Anthropocene. Anthropogenic impacts on stratigraphically important parameters: composition of the global atmosphere and temperature, cryosphere stability, ocean chemistry, for example, acidification, anoxia. These are related to ocean chemistry, as well as sea level, biodiversity, landscape processes, and near-surface sedimentation. The result of anthropogenic changes, according to the suggestion, will almost certainly be visible in a geologically distinctive records. In other words, we see that it's quite likely that Anthropocene will be declared as a geological epoch, geological era. The justification is climate change and increase in the amount of the carbon in the atmosphere. It was not known at the time whether these would give rise to a geologically distinctive layer, but it was expected. It's a kind of a guesswork. Possibly it's caused a geologically distinction. The group's goal is to find this distinctive layer, if any. In the presence of such a layer, Anthropocene will become a geological term. Although it's undeniable that humans have significantly changed the environment in which they live, whether these changes correspond to a geological period is independent of whether the changes are important to us or not. On the other hand, after all this time, we couldn't find a geologically distinguishable layer. One particularly striking suggestion refers to the accumulation of plastic and chicken bones. It's indisputable that plastic production is new in world history and that the amount of chicken bones is too large in our epoch to exist in any other period. Moreover, they are spread throughout the world. So they are not limited to just a small geographical area. However, these are not useful markers for identifying a geological period. The most convincing among the suggestions is the abundance of radioactive isotopes in a certain period. Nuclear weapons tests conducted since 1945 have created a measurable difference in a regular layer throughout the world. Of course, the first few nuclear explosions had only local effects. However, from the early 1950s to the mid-1960s, many tests were carried out and their residues can be detected. Although the radioactive elements will disappear over time, the lead they will leave behind will provide a long-lasting mark. On the other hand, calling this Anthropocene is not compatible with the use of term in social sciences. It's not even suitable for the purposes of the Anthropocene research group. This radiation is not the cause of striking any important problems such as global climate change, increase in the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, or decrease in biodiversity. Even if nuclear weapons had never been invented, we would be talking about global climate change and forests being destroyed for livestock. The situation is similar for the future. The use or testing of nuclear weapons has been almost completely abandoned since the 1960s. Although it's possible to increase it from now on, it may never be used either. Therefore, the presence of radioactive elements is almost unrelated to climate change and excessive use of fossil fuels as expressed by the Anthropocene Working Group. Moreover, if we translate the problem into reducing the scar or the harm on the layer, the complete elimination of the use of nuclear weapons would seem to solve the problem created by the Anthropocene. Referring our problems to pseudo-objective science instead of making a political decision to change our way of life is itself a political choice. We already know the reasons of the crisis. So the question of whether these causes have an effect suitable for being called a geological period is not related to the existence of the crisis or importance to us. So can we think that rigidly fixing the meaning of the term through geology will create ambiguity and render the term dysfunctional? For example, in the current situation, the beginning of the term is unclear due to the ambiguity of its meaning. If we say the intense impact of humans on nature, the agricultural revolution, perhaps even the emergence of Homo sapiens is a very appropriate date. On the other hand, we may want to emphasize that the problem of today is a special problem that did not exist even 400 years ago. Therefore, dates that focus on excessive greenhouse gas emissions due to human activities and the destruction of natural forest areas for livestock can be suggested. The widespread use of plastic or widespread use of oil could also be a good start. The Industrial Revolution seems a more appropriate dating. I won't get into debate which of these dates is better. Similarly, I will not discuss whether to say Anthropocene or Capitalocene is better. My purpose in recalling these well-known debates is to point out the ambiguity of the term. If we really want to point out the important change such as global climate change and the decrease in biodiversity, which the Anthropocene Working Group mentioned when they started their work, we must accept that the reasons that create this situation are relatively new, not only in the geological sense, but also in human history. For example, let's think about the microplastic pollution that has reached the most untouched parts of the world. Plastic was invented at the beginning of the 20th century, however, it wasn't widely used until the Second World War. This shows that if the change we are talking about with the term Anthropocene includes the pollution created by plastic, we are talking about a problem that did not exist before the 1960s. Or if you want to point out the problems related to fossil fuels, we should remember that the first oil refinery was established in 1856. These discussions are also important to identify the perpetrators. If we posit the problem in the form of excessive use of fossil fuels or excessive use of plastic, we can argue that developed Western countries has a higher responsibility and China has an increasing responsibility. This is not just a historical debate. So if we have a decision about the causes and those responsible, we also have a decision about what should change and who should pay the price. Satyendra, Fiji's permanent representative to the UN, made a statement and said that 1.5 Celsius degree decrease is the last limit for Pacific countries, and the Western countries have the responsibility to take measures not to exceed it. So Prasad clearly thought that the source of the problem was the Western developed countries. One of in Prasad's statement, Prasad says, beyond that border, you are asking the leaders of Pacific countries to give up their right to exist as a country on the planet we share. To lose 1.5 Celsius degrees to declare war on the Pacific nations is waging war on our communities. It's that simple, period. As can be seen, if a decision can be reached regarding the reasons, this will also point out those responsible and what needs to be done. The editorial in Nature, which I mentioned earlier, seems to be saying that ambiguity prevents us from doing this. However, I think there is no need to do a geological research to say that Prasad is right. I argued that removing ambiguity through geological science is not only useless but also dangerous. Because if geology gives us the Anthropocene as the period that started on such and such a date, and in which the following was observed in the geological age, this would be of great service to clarify our discussions related to Anthropocene. But actually, this clarity will prevent the most important discussions. Once we agree on a clear definition, the debate can become a technical issue rather than a political one. For example, one of the steps taken regarding global climate change is to install devices that capture free carbon in the atmosphere. Even though this technology is expensive and far from having the capacity to solve the problem, it guides us by shaping our expectations. The problem was clearly identified as excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the technical solution was tried to be produced for this technical problem. As we are accustomed to with very technological development, early examples are inefficient and expensive. However, over time, they become widespread, effective, and cheaper. As can be seen, in this case, there is no need to question our effectiveness as humans, discuss our rights and limits, and assume our responsibilities. Still worse, in its vague form, the Anthropocene does not just refer to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. It's a very comprehensive ecosystem problem, including excessive use of plastic, the extinction of many living things, and the disappearance of many ecosystems. Even if carbon levels are significantly reduced, plastic production, for example, is not a problem. And again, this kind of technical approach turns the search for alternative names for as capitalism into a mere discussion of word choice. However, instead of expressing the problem as increasing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere without mentioning a perpetrator, it is better to discuss who the perpetrator is and what responsibility we have in this era. These are especially valuable discussions in the field of social sciences. As stated by the Anthropocene Working Group, one of the justifications for the demand to use this term as the name of geological period is that even if these geological changes had not occurred due to human impact, we would have to accept that a new era has begun. In other words, the science called stratigraphy does not study the reasons for the changes that occur in these layers in terms of its very reason for existence. It doesn't care about the perpetrator. Of course, this is not a defect per se or a fault per se. For example, an evolutionary biologist studying the Cambrian explosion might investigate why a huge variety of new fossils were suddenly found during this period. On the other hand, if these fossils were chosen as a distinguished feature of the Cambrian period, the culprits to be sought are the forces that reveal this. Other actors of the period are not subject to analysis. The problem with the Anthropocene is that once one or more specific signs are chosen, we will have already lost an interesting part of the discussion. Once we define the Anthropocene with a specific geological layer, then the questions such as when it started and the reasons for its formation are determined independently of the discussions in the social sciences. For example, if nuclear markers are considered the beginning of the Anthropocene, the only way to say that the Anthropocene is caused by capitalism is to show that there would be no nuclear weapons tests if capitalism did not exist. I'm not sure if this is possible. The countries responsible for the emergence of the Anthropocene are, by definition, those who have tested nuclear weapons. There is no rational doubt about this. So, for example, Germany is not responsible. Of course, it's a clear mistake to call this process, in which the Soviet Union and China are largely responsible and Germany is innocent, as capitalism. So can concepts such as Anthropocene or capitalism be functional as awake concepts? Can we say that to leave them awake will be functional too? Even we cannot agree on whether it started with the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution. What goods will make the name for us? In my opinion, the issue of where to start is a discussion that expands our horizons, and social sciences are very experienced in using such terms. Renaissance or Middle Age are not names of geological periods. There are many different opinions about when did they begin and when they end. From time to time, those who make additional distinctions such as early medieval age or others, they just produce new ambiguous boundaries rather than solving the problem. Despite all this, it cannot be said that these terms are not functional. This kind of ambiguity makes the discussions in the social sciences valuable. Making it geological names would be doing bad science and would render the term useless in social and political matters. If the existence of an officially recognized Anthropocene period and the geological marker for it has any effect, it would be to dampen interdisciplinary studies. What we try to tell with the term Anthropocene are recent developments such as global climate change, the rapid extinction of biodiversity, and the spread of microplastics to the most remote corners of the planet are important, whether or they not have left a trace that can now be noticed in the geological layer. The question of whether their traces can be found in a possible geological resource after 100,000 years can be a very interesting scientific question. On the other hand, whether the answer to this question is yes or no, we have a responsibility to act today. Many species of living beings on planet Earth have disappeared without leaving a trace enough to give their name to a geological period. Even if it's true that humans left such a trace, geology can only make a meaningful judgment about it after a few thousand years. Surely we have no reason to wait that long. Moreover, what will be the remaining trace and how we should act are two different questions. In this respect, a good discussion of Anthropocene does not require a sharp technical definition of the concept, and the definition to be made by geologists is lacking function in determining our actions. It will likely have an effect of dampening our valuable political debates. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Çok teşekkür ederiz.
Thank you very much for this. Are there any questions? You can write your questions to the chat box. As I said, we started late the previous session. We can take a few questions. Maybe before taking the first question, I can ask something. There was an issue which attracted my attention. What you have told is very convincing, but maybe it can be better to underline a point. To define Anthropocene just as a geological issue will kind of reduce all issue to a technical issue. If we make it technical, maybe we cannot, as it were, we cannot discuss at all the socio-political part. As it were, technical and political are so independent from one another. Can you develop on this? Can you elaborate on this, please? Yeah, thank you very much. I don't want to have a misunderstanding. Of course, I'm not suggesting that science is objective. We cannot make political or moral discussions. But I am trying to oppose this. Being Anthropocene a geological term, if it's a geological term, if people say that we have to define it as an exact geological term, they imply that we can take political steps and make interdisciplinary studies only after this. Kind of. So we don't know when it began. We don't know what is a better parameter to define Anthropocene. And this actually supports the discussions in social sciences, political and ethical discussions. If you just say that geologists should find the commencement of the era, we can lose political discussions. But even if it happens, there will be some social scientists who goes on saying, I'm not interested in what you are saying in geology, I'm interested in something else. Either they will deform the term or they will be using another name for it. But what I try to say is, while we have a rich discussion stemming from the vagueness of the concept, why are we trying to lose this concept? It will not make us gain anything new as social sciences. I hope this is clearer. Thank you very much. People tell us that they cannot write their questions because the chat box is closed. Let's try to resolve this problem. There is a question which I received from private channel. Çilengiroğlu asks, Cem, I salute you. Thank you very much for this nice summary. Is Holocene going on? That's what I want to learn. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Çiler. Holocene, in this sense, is going on. International Union of Geologists have not accepted the term Anthropocene. They are still working, but so far, we haven't made the transition to the new era. Possibly we will never declare a new era because geologists are looking too far back. It's hard for them to date an event happened hundreds or 50 years ago. So we can say that Holocene is still going on. Technically, we are still in this term. According to me, the issue is there are two issues at stake. What's important for us today, politically, and what's important for geology. They do not necessarily need to overlap. That's why I gave the example of medieval age. Medieval age is not geologically interesting. There is not a geologic renaissance, geologic middle age. But of course, they are very valuable for us. We don't say that nothing changed for the humanity. I am not objecting against the value of Anthropocene. Just I'm against making it to a geologically relevant time. Technically, it's not yet. Thank you very much for the question.
Evet, bir soru bir soru daha geldi ama galiba benim az önce de sorduğum soruyla biraz yakından.
There is another question, but actually it's closely connected to what I have asked.
Antroposenin ne zaman başladığı sorusuna jeolojik ve politik yaklaşımlar iki zıt cevap mı vermektedir?
Our geological and political approaches give two opposing answers to the beginning of the Anthropocene, or do both groups have some overlapping answers, and how can we understand what is geological and what is politics? A nice question, parallel to what Karun has asked. Of course, I don't want to make exact limits such as it's neither geological nor politics, because science is not also free from politics. Of course, everything in science is also value loaded. When we call it Holocene, is also politically loaded concepts, because we are looking at nature in terms of its interest with humans, or like, what can humans find. There might be some atmospheric changes which are not geologically traceable. But of course, atmospheric effects are extraordinarily important in terms of our social life. For a geologist, a parameter which is completely meaningless for a geologist can be the parameter which is affecting most our daily life. When we speak about Anthropocene, actually we are referring to a group of changes, especially a set of changes which happen due to humans' agency. But geologists are looking at and even if it's coming from the humans or others, if they are leaving a trace, they give a name to their. Of course, these dates can overlap, but they don't need
Bence Antroposen için çok kötü bir tarih. Dediğim gibi yani Almanya'nın Antroposen'de hiçbir suçu
dating.
söyleyeceğimiz bir tarihe karşılık geliyor. 19
In this way, Germany is not responsible at all. It started in 1950s and ended in 1960s. This is this is not what we mean with Anthropocene. Thank you.
Thank you. Now that we have prolonged the previous session, I will be receiving only one more question. Our apologies. Apologies to the others people who ask questions in order to restrict our time. Özgür Soysal, sorry, Zerrin Kurtoğlu has a question. I would like to convey that first. So, the deep political relationship between social sciences and natural sciences is what Cem Kamözüt referred to. Thank you very much. And what do you think about not actually having being inefficient, the individual measures that we take, actually, wouldn't it render the perpetrators invisible? Thank you very much. Actually, the questions such as Anthropocene has many pillars, and the solution won't be an individual solution. You are very right about it, Zerrin. I would like to emphasize that, like, I am throwing my plastic bottles into recycle, so the world will now become a better place, blah, blah. So it's impossible to say that, but let me underline that it doesn't necessarily mean that individually we don't need to do anything. We can do so many things, but of course, such big questions cannot be solved on an individual level. They require a societal, political decision-making level. But of course, so we need to solve these big problems by coming together as individuals rather than sitting so that the politicians do the right thing. But what we can say is that this needs to be an organized struggle. It is obvious. Then we can have no hope of creating a more beautiful world unless we organize as individuals. Thank you very much for your question. Okay, thank you. Then my apologies once again. Apologies to the participants. There were several more questions, but I won't be able to articulate them because we are exceeding our time. Dr. Kamözüt, thank you very much for this nice speech and for accepting our invitation. So we're concluding our session and see you at 12 o'clock. Once again, our sessions start, and you can actually follow us on the social media accounts. The program has been published. See you tomorrow. Thank you all.